The Planning Commission's bylaws limit the applicant on a zoning or subdivision application and his or her representative to a total of 10 minutes of speaking time at the start of the hearing on that item, plus up to 2 minutes at the conclusion of that hearing. All other persons wishing to speak on agenda items are limited to 3 minutes per person. However, if they feel that it is needed and justified, the Commission may extend these times by a majority vote. All speakers are requested to state his or her name and address for the record when beginning to speak. When you are finished speaking, please write your name, address, and the case number on the sheet provided in the lobby. This will enable staff to notify you if there are any additional proceedings concerning that item. Please note that all written and visual materials you present to the Commission will be retained by the Secretary as part of the official record. If you are not speaking, but you wish to be notified about future proceedings on a particular case, please sign in on that same sheet. The Planning Commission is interested in hearing the views of all persons who wish to express themselves on the agenda items. However, we ask that all speakers please be as concise as possible and avoid long repetitions of facts or opinions which have already been stated. For your information, the Wichita City Council has adopted a policy for all city zoning items. A copy of this policy is available in the lobby. The City Council relies on a written record of the Planning Commission hearings and does not conduct their own additional public hearings on these items.
Hey, welcome everyone. Let's start with our subdivision cases. Case number 00040, one-step final plat of the 8 Acres Edition. Anyone on the commission want to hear that case? Anyone in the audience wish to hear that case? Okay, we'll take that by consent. Case number 00043, a one-step final plat, Farmers Co-op. Anybody on the commission like to hear that one? Seeing none, anybody in the audience wish to hear it? Okay, we'll take that by consent. Case number 00044, one-step final plat, Myers Commercial Edition. Anybody on the commission wish to hear that one? Anyone in the audience wish to hear? Okay, can we have a motion on those three?
So moved.
Mr. Green and Mr. McKay? I'll get you next. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, let's go to our vacation items. Item number 00037, city vacation of a 20-foot platted easement, utility easement on property zone SF5, single-family residential. Anybody in the commission wish to hear that one? Anybody in the audience wish to hear that? Okay. 3-2, which is 00038, city vacation of a 5-foot by 15-foot piece. Anybody in the commission wish to hear that? Anyone in the audience wish to hear that one? Okay, we'll take that by consent. 3-3, 00039, city vacation of a portion of a platted front yard setback. Anyone in the commission like to hear that one? Anybody in the audience wish to hear it? Okay, we'll take that by consent. And our last one is 3-4, 00040, city vacation of a platted drainage and utility easement. Mr. Foster.
Chairman, I just have a quick question for staff. Is given that this one is tied to a later case, do we need to defer that or?
I would like to
continue
find out if we need to hear it now.
I'm just saying, are we able to go ahead and?
You can
What
take
I plan
action
to-
on it.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody wish to hear it? Seeing none, anyone in the audience wish to hear it? Okay, we take that by consent. We have 4 of them by consent.
So moved. Second.
Mr. Green, who is the second? Okay, got it. Okay. Our public hearings, case number 00034. All in favor? Well, let's back up. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay. Thank you. A little bit quicker next time. Okay, going to our public hearing cases. Number 4, 00034. City conditional use to allow vehicle and equipment sales in a limited commercial zone district. Anybody on the commission wish to hear that one? Anybody in the audience here to hear that? Okay, we'll take that by consent. Number 5, PUD 2017, case number quadruple 06, city zone change from TF3 two-family residential to PUD number 54. Anybody, Mr. Richardson, you'd like to hear that one? Okay, we'll hear it. Case number 6, which is 00050, city amendment to a proactive overlay 78 to remove prohibition of outdoor storage. Anybody like to hear that case? Anybody in the audience wish to hear it? We'll hear that one.
Number 7.
00049 and the CUP 2017 00045. Anybody in the council commission wish to hear that? Okay, we'll hear that one. Okay, at this time, we'd like to, yeah, you want to go ahead and vote on it? Okay. Let's vote on just number 4.
Move that we approve number 4.
Green and
I'll second that.
Mr. Johnson, I think second it. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. So we recess now. This time I would like to recess the Metropolitan Area Planning Commission. Have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. And all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, so we'll go to our other agenda, which is the Wichita-Sedgwick County Board of Zoning Appeals. And we have the BZA 2017 00049. City variance to remove the rear yard setback to allow for an additional principal residence structure on property zoned single-family 5, generally located north of West MacArthur Road and west of Southwest Street. Have a presentation on that, or? Oh, okay. No, anybody like to hear that one?
I have some questions related to the conditions for staff.
Okay. Anyone in the audience want to hear that case? Okay, seeing none, I'd like staff to come forward for questions from Mr. Foster at least.
Kyle Covey, Associate Planner.
I just want to make sure that, I don't see it in the conditions here, but this is contingent on the earlier vacation case of the drainage easement to go through. Should that be a condition?
The two are tied together. I suppose the applicant wouldn't be able to build on the property unless both were approved. So whether they were tied together or not, the use itself would not be allowed unless both were approved. But we don't currently have it written up where one is contingent upon approval of the other. They're just related to one another.
I just want to make sure that the vacation doesn't go through, and perhaps this doesn't or something, just for any reason on it. I think there ought to be a condition related to it so it's known.
I didn't catch everything you just said. I'm sorry.
I think there ought to be a condition related to it so that it's known and it's written, rather than just assume that it's going to be taken clerically or done. All right.
And a motion?
I've got 3 other items here.
Oh. Sorry.
The second is, in the report there, it refers to the secretary that the variance to reduce the required front yard from 20 feet to 0 feet. I believe it's the rear yard.
It is the rear yard, yes.
That's in the recommendation on it. And then
What page is that?
page 3 on the staff report. Then the second item is condition 2 explains it would only apply to the building addition versus all of the setback. Does that mean that it's only going to be the imprint of the building pad that's going to be what's the vacation? Because if you vacate the whole, the easement needs to go away on it. But my question is, you're vacating the setback. So is it just going to be that little sliver, that triangular piece of the building that goes in there? Or is it the entire one leg of the plat? What piece is actually going to get vacated?
So the way that it's written there is that it is being vacated for this addition. I suppose I could offer to clarify that statement by saying that they are vacating the entire rear setback easement, or we can leave it as is and stating that this is only being vacated for that structure.
I just want whatever's cleanest for staff relative to future records on it. Okay. Then the final one is, you know, we've run into this before where homeowners groups have had to come back and adjust their reserve designations. Does the reserve designation on this plat allow for someone to come and maintain their building since we're now giving a 0 setback?
You're asking if,
On the reserve to.
There's
maintain.
if you could see on the north end of the lot, there's a reserve that allows you to go from the cul-de-sac back to the rest of the reserve. So there's a permanent way to get from the front of the house to the rear without crossing somebody else's property, if that's the question.
Question is there wording on the plat relative to what can and can't be done in the reserve? We've had people come and change their plat.
Well, but
Because
they're not
they had
encroaching in the plat, into the reserve. Yeah, there's language on the face of the plat that says reserve is to be for whatever uses it is, but the structure is not blocking anybody's ability to use the reserve.
But if they're in the reserve and they're going to maintain a building that's at a 0 setback, then they're doing something in the reserve that's not allowed by the reserve language.
so they're not actually,
By vacating
they're not extending over the property line. So this will still be on their property. It will just be, they're just asking for the setback to be vacated to allow it to be this close a proximity to the property line. So they won't actually be constructing this home addition out into that reserve, which I think is what you're asking.
No.
Yeah.
No, we're not communicating on it. I think Mr. Avey
Let me
understands
make
what
a
I'm
shot at it.
asking about.
Let me make a shot at it. I think what he's saying is if you needed to repair that house, put up a scaffolding on the outside, your scaffolding would go up inside the reserve, and potentially somebody might keep you from being able to do that unless it was allowed, and Russ is shaking his head here, so maybe he has the answer.
Russ Avey, don't I always? Russ Avey, agent for the applicant. Yes, we would be allowed in that reserve language. We have rights of access. We can put up a boat dock. We have slips. People have planted trees. If you look at this Reserve A and what is being allowed in Blue Lake Addition, that would allow for any type of access, including any type of construction access for putting up scaffolding and resiting the west face of that building. So yes, under the current platted terms of that Reserve A, that would be allowed, that would be a permissible use. Actually, there's quite a whole host of uses permitted by that reserve.
That was my question. Thank you.
Okay, do you have all your questions answered, David?
Yes.
Are you in a position to make a motion?
I would move for approval then. with the subtle changes to the conditions. Yeah.
You have a second?
I'll second, but I'm not sure. I'd like to hear again the subtle changes.
Okay, we have a second from Lowell here. How do you have the subtle changes?
One would be the correction to rear versus front noted. Second would, just a clarification on exactly what setback we're talking about. It's not just the building, it's the actual setback along the plat lines. And I think Mr. Avey has covered us on the maintenance issue. So just those two.
Include those in the motion?
I guess I'm unclear what you mean by clarification of the building. What are you talking about?
Condition 2 states would only apply to the building addition itself. So that means the imprint of the building pad is what the setback would, the zero portion would be.
And that's pretty typical in terms of variances that are granted of setbacks. It's typically only for a specific project. So that would continue to be our recommendation, is that you'd be granting a variance of the setback just for the proposed addition,
So
not
if
for
you,
any other future additions.
okay, that's,
Okay, so that the portion along that property line does not go to zero. It only goes to where that building hits it, that it can be zero.
Well,
Is that correct?
I think it's both. I think the setback would be reduced to zero, but the only structure that you could get a building permit for would be the one that's being proposed.
But then it's not the building. That's not what the vacation is.
What
Vacation is
we
the
typically have
entire
done is, we have only reduced the setback for the footprint of the addition or the building. The rest of the setback would remain as it is today. Does that answer your question?
let's clarify
That's what I
that.
want clarification
Yeah,
on.
that's what we've typically done.
So your motion should read that way.
And it would remain the same if we understand it, just so it's clear that the rest of that setback does not go to zero. It's
That's
only
your
right
motion.
where the building is. Yes.
Second, you accept that?
Yes.
Any more discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay. I adjourn the zoning appeals board. And we will go back in session for MAPC meeting. And we'll have the presentation from staff on item number 5.
Kathy Morgan, Senior Planner. Good afternoon, Commissioners. This is a request for a zoning change from TF3 to a planned unit development. And this location is where the Metro Boulevard Alternative School, USD 259, had an alternative school at that location, and USD 259 has this building under contract, and so the building sits on this larger triangle piece, and then there are some, this is parking to the north of it. As you can see, the property is located along the exit of the 135 Expressway. It does sit back into the neighborhood. These are local streets. And so the applicant is requesting the PUD to allow reuse of the existing school building, which potentially may be a historic tax credit project. This building was built in 26 is what I had down there. And so it would be eligible for both state and federal historic tax credits. On the face of the PUD, the description for the development is to create a unique mixed-use center, providing community-needed art studio space, educational outreach, a community gathering facility, and a residential component. And the residential component is limited to 3 units. And as you would see in the staff report, we discussed, I attached the general provisions of the conditional use that discusses how the community facility would be handled as an event center. Only, it's not a nightclub in the city. It's an event center. It's limited to, let's see, where are my numbers here? It's limited to music inside only. There would be no exterior speakers. A limit of 125 persons at one time. There was some question, since this is TF3 currently, signage would only be allowed in TF3 if you had a home occupation and the sign would be 2 square feet. With this going to, the applicant requested central business district regulations for the building setbacks and for signage. So this would allow on signage along the freeway a maximum of a 300 square foot sign, and on these local streets a maximum of 50 square feet per sign per the way the sign code reads, 0.5 times the frontage. And those frontages are about 325 feet along the local streets right there. Oops, excuse me, let me go back. Oh. Scott, what's the... Oh, good. No, yeah, get me there, please. Thank you. This is the aerial, and as you can see, what I was talking about, the main building. There are a couple of the portable school buildings that remain on site, and those were put in the 70s. And as you can see, this type of use would fit in with what our comprehensive plan, our community investment plan does promote this type of activity in this area. In your packet, was included the planned unit development drawing, and as I stated, this side would be up against the freeway, and these are local connectors. This is the parking parcel that has approximately 18 parking spaces. Although it's TF3, these properties are developed with single-family units for the most part. There are no duplexes in the neighborhood. I have received a couple of calls about this. Concern from the neighbors. One of the neighbors was what the use was going to be, because during its life as the alternative school, they had issues with burglaries in the neighborhood, and since the school had ceased operation, that issue had gone away. This is looking south at the site. As you can see, the freeway on the western boundary of the site. This is looking back toward the front of the school building along George Washington Boulevard. Typical houses in the neighborhood. And then this is looking back, and the parking area is tucked back behind these residences here and up against the fence along the freeway. And staff recommended the PUD be approved. This will allow the building to be reutilized. It will allow for the neighborhood to have access to a community facility to hold functions. It would provide some living space, and it fits in with the community investment plan, and I will answer any questions.
Questions for Kathy? Mr. Richardson?
Kathy, on the signs, will those allowed to be illuminated in the neighborhood on Morris and George Washington 24 hours a day?
This, what the sign code, they could be interior illuminated, yes. They could be spotlighted. LED signs are a different thing. They can't, LED signs cannot face residential areas, because we have that, a lot of that with churches in neighborhoods wanting to use LED signs. Churches do use lighted signs in neighborhoods, so yes, it could be illuminated.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Ms. Morgan?
Got a question.
Yes, sir.
Now, it states in here that they can have up to, like in their activity area, like up to 125.
Right,
people.
yes.
Where would they park all of those people?
I'm going to let the agent answer that. They have a couple of different plans on how they would provide that, but certainly there's on-street, like what was going on when the school was in existence. There's on-street parking. The streets are relatively wide. There is opportunity for parking along here, but I think the agent has some more information about the parking. And they were requesting in the PUD that the parking be set in at 18 spaces.
Thought I read also that they were looking at possibly vacating Washington Boulevard there in front of the school.
Yes, that's one of the possibilities.
Now, would they be able to vacate the entire length of that, or would that segment next to that residential house be affected?
I think that would be that would have to be answered at the time the vacation application was submitted. It looks like they would only have this one property owner to deal with on the corner to see how they could effect that vacation.
Any other questions for Ms. Morgan? Seeing none, agent or applicant?
Russ Avey, agent for the applicant with Boffman Company. I'll start with the illuminated sign question. I'm not sure how impactful that is, but one of the things when we put this plan unit development together, we discussed, as you know, lighting standards are one of the main components of CUPs and PUDs and non-residential development within or adjacent to residential development. No different here, with the exception of the fact that we are adjacent to the Cloverleaf. There is no lighting standards that we can place on this property. There are probably no illuminated sign restrictions that we would benefit from putting on this property in light of the fact that we have 80-foot, anywhere from 50 to 80-foot light standards all throughout that canal route. So the background, the ambient light from just the transportation facilities adjacent to this property really kind of, we didn't see a necessity of really dealing with lighting issues that much. I will say this, that any signage that we would have that would face to the west or the northeast wouldn't be straight on fronting a residence's front yard. So again, we would be really only impacting potentially this one home here with any type of signage. And again, signage isn't a major concern for this use. This location, different than other school repurposing that we've been a part of, this one's tucked away in a very hard to reach spot. It's at the end of the road, literally in a neighborhood. So gone are the ideas of having a lot of office or retail, commercial type of use. So that's why you see a unique set of potential proposed uses for the property. And there was a question about the vacation of George Washington Boulevard as it lies west of Madison. And Just to quickly go over what our thoughts are, you will notice that we would have to get a co-application from this property owner here. We feel as though we can open up a lot of parking, probably about another 40 to 45 parking stalls if we were to vacate that and redevelop it. This particular property may be interested in doing a vacation case along with us for the simple fact that this stretch from this southwest property line to the sidewalk has been fenced in and been used as their backyard. They would be able to legally reclaim this little strip of ground here if we were to vacate George Washington Boulevard. So we're not in a position with this zoning request to make that type of commitment as part of this application. But what we did see is the benefit to parking, which we identified as clearly the number one issue with this particular request, or anything that's going to go in, quite frankly, to this property, is parking. And so we felt like writing a few of these conditions as a trigger mechanism that we can get from 125-person event centers to 250-person event centers in the event that we are able to provide additional off-street parking. There's several triggers in there that allow for that type of expanded use once we're able to account for additional parking. Our parking is based off of, and just to put things into perspective, about 20 years ago, the school district, I guess in repurposing their own school to Metro Boulevard, came in and was approved for a parking variance, a BZA variance to parking and setbacks. That parking variance established the 24 parking spaces in this northern diamond-shaped tract, as well as it permitted approximately 34 additional parking spaces along George Washington Boulevard west of Madison Avenue. So again, the BZA approved, and we have a functional amount of approximately 62 parking spaces, although the majority of those are off or in-street parking. So again, that's basically our frame of reference when it comes to parking, and I'll be more than happy to stand and answer any questions that you may have.
Questions for the agent, Mr. Ritson?
So the 62, Russ, are along the street plus the 18 in the parking lot? Is that what?
There were 24 in parcel 1.
But
There
you're
were
only-
28 within both sides of George Washington Boulevard, and there were 10 spots identified along Morris Street to the south.
Okay, when you say there's 20, but you're only asking for 18 as a part of this. Is that my understanding?
Well, if you can see here, we can functionally, it would be my opinion that we can functionally get about 18 or 20 spaces in there.
Okay.
The school district showed a parking plan for 24. I'm not sure that we would be able to replicate that parking design, but if you wanted to extend that to 24 instead of 18, we'd be more than happy to. Again, we were looking at this as an existing school. Schools generate traffic. They have events, not just the patrons. We realize that the kids may or may not be driving to this school, but parents sure are. So we're trying to codify a list of uses that we would fit into that same type of pattern. I did receive 3 phone calls from property owners in the area, mainly concerned that we weren't putting in apartments or turning the whole school into an apartment building. And then the second major concern was on-street parking, and I explained to them, just as I explained here, our thoughts on parking.
Questions for the applicant? Seeing none? Anybody from
Thank
the audience that wishes to speak on this? Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the commission.
Move we approve the staff comments.
Second.
Okay, and Ms. Miles, second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay. Let's go to item, case number 6. Okay.
Is this just questions, or was somebody raised his hand is not here? The guy that raised his hand
Oh.
doesn't appear to be here.
Is there anyone in the audience who wants to speak on this?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's down there. I thought it was. Let's go ahead with the presentation then.
Thank you. Yeah. This is the request, rezone to amend the protective overlay that was previously granted on the property at 11016 West K42 Highway. This is the Schulte, now the storage complex that, as in the history and the staff report outlines, there had been the original application that established the protective overlay, and one of the restrictions was no outdoor storage. They built the self-storage complex. The point is, this property is zoned GC. That's important to remember as we go forward. That's the property, and the highlight white that's on the north and west side really is the roof line of the building. That's, the existing building is already there that looks that way. The south is open, and you can see we're dealing with kind of a triangular shaped property. This is a gas station convenience store on K42 Highway. Access to this storage area is actually through this driveway, and there's a gate roughly at that location. This is in an area of the comprehensive plan that envisions new employment, and we're not necessarily creating new employment, but it kind of fits into the overall concept of what's permitted. This is the site looking north. I'm in the west edge of the, or east edge of the parking area for the convenience store looking north. You can see the building, and this is the gate that gets entrance into the open area. You can tell on the kind of the east side, there is a masonry wall that screens that area to the north. Everything else along the frontage is fenced for security purposes, but there's no screening per se. That's the actual convenience store that's at the location. About 6-7 years ago, there was an amendment made to this PO that allowed the construction of a cell tower within the property. And you can see the cell tower is there. That is a 100-foot tower existing. There's a fence around the security area within that tower. The rest of this property is open. This is looking at the entrance off of K42, looking to the south. This is looking kind of southeast from the location where I was standing. I just turned. Existing sign for the property. This building across the south side of K42 is the Schulte Lumberyard facility. So those are the issues involved here. If I go back to the aerial, this old aerial actually shows the reason that was open in the area is because when it was first built, there was an on-site lagoon for the convenience store. This has subsequently been annexed into the city. Public sewers have gotten to the site, so they have abandoned the lagoon, reclaimed the site. It's all open and is just open grass. And so the request is to modify to allow outdoor storage. They're apparently very successful with the indoor storage facility, but they have a lot of clients that are interested primarily in boats, campers, other things that don't fit inside the building. They'd like to rent space to store outdoors, so that's the reason for the request. Staff has recommended approval. It's outlined in the staff report. What we have done is taken the existing list of entire things with respect to the protective overlay, bringing in the language that was amended when the cell tower was constructed, and really only modifying provision 2, which under the old PO said no outdoor storage. We modified that to say storage is allowed subject to the conditions, and I do believe the applicant has some questions and concerns about those conditions is the reason he wants to talk. If this aerial works, I'm just going to leave this up for the time being and open it up to questions from the board.
Questions for staff? Seeing none?
Right.
Applicant.
Again, Russ Avey, agent for the applicant with Boffman Company. Just really quickly, one of the things that was approved during the initial protective overlay number 78 was some modifications of standard supplementary regulations dealing with the paving of the site. As you're familiar, most larger self-storage warehouse developments are all entirely paved, almost 100% paved surfacing. In this situation, the owner was granted a waiver of that standard. It's referenced in the first condition where it talks about accepting out items 1, 2, 5, 8, and 17 out of the supplementary use regulations. However, in expanding the second condition, Dave added condition 2A into the mix, which runs counter to the initial approval of crushed rock as a suitable driving surface and parking surface. So we were asking that the Planning Commission strike or approve the request with the exception of 2A. That references a different section of the code as it relates to parking and drive aisles. The property's been developed for about 17 years. It used initially asphalt millings as the driving surface around the perimeter of the site. When the mono tower was built, its compound and driveway to that monopole in the center is crushed rock. And again, we are looking for that standard to carry over from the original approval. And I'll stand for any questions you may have.
Anyone else from the audience like to speak? Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the commission. Mr. Miller would like to make us. Okay.
Second.
Mr. McKay. As recommended or as requested by AB?
Requested by Mr. Avey.
Is that the way you understand it, Mr. McKay?
My second, yes, that's what.
Any discussion? Seeing none, who? Oh, Mr. Foster. You gotta
I
get
just
higher.
want to get a comment from staff related to that. I mean, is that kind of standard that, if you did want to get that paving requirement, now's the time to put it in there, or what's the?
Well, the reason that provision was modified to address the standards, I will admit, I kind of missed that sub-reference back to waiving some standards. It probably was a little bit unclear even in my mind after rereading it based on Mr. Avey's comments to us before the meeting started, that the standards with respect to that supplementary use regulations in 3D6Y applied to self-storage units, NGO and LC. Remember, this is zone GC, so whether right, wrong, or indifferent, it's a little fuzzy. I'm not disputing the Russ's comments with respect to the intent, because if I remember when I started this, he even said he was the one on staff that wrote this back when it first came through umpteen years ago. So,
Okay,
so we're coming forward, just noting those standards apply. I presume, and I'm going to defer a little bit to Dale, but I would presume if the commission wishes to accept a modification to that standard and you want to recommend that to the governing body for approval, that's within your parameter to do that.
okay.
So we,
See, Mr. Johnson.
One question, there's a similar situation that was at, just east of this on MacArthur, and I see their outside storage is all paved. I didn't know if that was a requirement when that one was approved, and now we're not gonna approve this, that's my only concern.
In the zoning code, if it's not single-family residential duplexes or single-family, then it's supposed to be asphalt or concrete. per the code. However, in the county, for whatever reason, they have allowed gravel on commercial uses. This was developed when it was in the county. And so that's, in this particular situation, that's why I'm saying that we don't have heartburn, because it continues what they actually had to start with. But technically, if it's not one of those two things under the code, then it's supposed to be paved.
I believe this one that's east of there's in the county, but it is all concrete. So I just wanted to make sure that we hadn't put that requirement on him and then his competitor don't have to do it.
Any other discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous. Okay, item number 7. Staff presentation, please. Is this one, do we have something to talk about, or is there questions?
Mr. Chairman, item number 7, we would like, if you would, I handed out beforehand the memo that came to you. Would like the Planning Commission, if you would please, to at least act upon that before we start the public hearing on item number 7. In summary, what we've got with that case is questions that have been presented to staff and City Attorney's Office regarding whether or not proper written notice was provided at the beginning of this case. And as I outlined in the memo, I give you the dates in which that was processed and handled. Questions subsequently were raised with other issues involved. Historically, most communities have taken the position that the purpose of the written notice is to advise other area landowners of when the public hearing is, and you should be here if you have an interest. Additional language exists in our Unified Zoning Code that says if there is a question that has arisen, and we believe that's probably the case here. And I added at the bottom of that memo where it says B, notices and hearings, the actual language that the Planning Commission is charged at the beginning of the hearing to receive information regarding what has been done by staff, and that's outlined in the memo. And at the end, if there is a question raised, then the Planning Commission, the body hearing the matter, is to make a formal finding that there was substantial compliance with the notice requirements. And so that's what we're asking this Planning Commission to do, to put on the record. And I provide at the very bottom of that second page a suggested motion that has been reviewed by City Attorney as well, that we believe the substantial compliance was met. Questions regarding, and actually the city code language says, just because you don't get the message or the mail notice does not invalidate anything going forward. We simply want to have on the record that the motion was done to find by the Planning Commission that the staff did follow and had met the requirement for substantial compliance with notice requirements, and that, as it says at the end of that motion, the public hearing regarding the two cases involved is to just move forward without delay. So that does not invalidate anything else going forward. It just simply puts on the record that we have complied with and met the requirements of the code to get the hearing before the Planning Commission.
So we're doing this because we've had a protest about this?
No,
I mean,
no,
we don't-
sir. There has not been a protest filed. Wasn't a question raised and a claim made that the party involved, which is the owner of the property immediately to the west,
Right.
at their offices, did not receive the written notice. We sent confirmation to them that here's the address we had to mail them to. Here's when these occurred. The original notice went out October 12th. Because of a concurrent action to annex the property into the city, we further did a second notice about a week later to just simply say this is a courtesy notice because there's now a DAB meeting involved, because when this started, it was still in the county.
Right, I understand
So-
that. My question is, why would we do this one and not do every other one that we ever hear?
Because our zoning code says when the question, that's what is in the bottom of that memo. When that question arises, the request by our zoning code is for the planning commission in this case to make a finding that we are in substantial compliance with the notice requirements so we can go forward.
So we're doing this because we got a phone call, essentially.
Yes.
That's correct, and the zoning code says that you're supposed to make a finding, a formal finding. And so I think that's what the memo that's been put together.
Formal finding when? When we get a phone call or we get a?
It says when there's a question raised at the hearing regarding the adequacy of notice. And I think to what Dave's talking about, I think there has been a question
That's my
raised.
question. Because there was a question, the ordinance requires us then to confirm that there was adequate notice. Okay. And that question simply can be a phone call. It doesn't have to be a written request. It was in writing. It was in writing. Okay, great. Thank you.
Mr. Foster.
I just want to make sure in terms of protocol here, we have listed on number 3 to ask the chairman to allow 3 minutes to a representative from Murphy Incorporated, so forth. Is that the procedure we should take before we act on item number 4? Or should we go ahead and begin to hear the case and?
I'm not going to
would
supersede
cure
the
itself.
attorney, but we do have a representative for the applicant here. Whether or not they wish to speak is unknown.
There is nothing in the code pertaining to the actual procedure for handling this matter, and that was put in there to offer the opportunity for proper due process to have the party objecting to the notice to have a few minutes to express their opinion on it. Although this is, again, it's a situation where under our code, it's when it's mailed, and it's not necessary. It doesn't say that it's required to be received, but they do have an opportunity. We'll provide that if they so wish, that period of time to explain themselves.
Certainly going to hear this case. But I guess I'd look to you, Mr. Foster, if you want to make a motion that we do number 3 or not. Or you
As
just
long
want,
as we hear the case, I don't see why we can't proceed to number 4.
so we need a motion then on the suggested motion. Mr. Warren?
Kind of question on this, if assuming that we pass, we make this motion and it passes. So we're saying that substantially we've done all we should do in terms of notifications. My question to the attorneys is, if we pass that, you're confident that you could, if somebody wanted to appeal that, says you didn't do due diligence, you didn't do the right notification, that you're confident that we would prevail if that was challenged?
That argument still could be made before the governing body.
Or the county commission? Before
City
this
in
body?
this case, yeah, or it'll go to the city with the annexation.
Go for
probably,
the,
so.
okay, go to the
Or
city.
kind of straddling the fence here
Okay.
on this, but yeah.
If they were to win that appeal, if they were to prevail at that point, what would be the process in going through? I guess the question I'm going at is, would it be simpler to delay now or go through the process and then have to go through it all
Your
again?
standard of review is very specific. It is, did the staff mail the notice in a timely fashion to the correct address? And they've stated what they've done in the email. There is no other consideration as to the motion at this time.
So just a question, in staff's memo here, it proposes 3 minutes, I think, isn't it in here?
Yes.
3 minutes for the protesting party to speak at this time. So therefore, I would move to comply with what staff has requested here.
We have a second.
Second that.
John? Any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye.
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 Let's show of hands. Opposed?
What was the motion again?
Motion is allow applicant to spend 3 minutes to talk about it. All in favor?
Aye.
Discussion, question. The point being, number 3 is that the questioning party
Not the
is to relate their information to our action that this was in compliance versus the case itself.
So we're asking, would be allowing the landowner to the west to make their case that they were not properly notified. And you're making a motion that we allow them that opportunity, and we have a second by Mr. Daly. Any more discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. And who would that be?
Not sure who wants to,
Okay?
I'm Justin Elcory, representative for, I guess, the owner to the west, if that's how we're, this is an issue that we're not protesting, so I don't know that, I mean, we're not in protest of whether or not we received notice, so I'm not sure why it's even a discussion topic, to be honest.
Did your group make the call?
We didn't receive notice, so we asked whether or not notices were sent, that was all.
In writing, you made that?
Verbally, and then I think Jeremy sent an email, is that right? Yeah.
Okay. I suppose we probably ought to have some acknowledgement by you that you're withdrawing that,
Yes, correct. We've received notice,
so then we don't need the motion, right?
correct.
I'd like to do it just to cover ourselves.
Okay, we're going to do the motion. Thank you.
Okay.
Yes, Mr. Green.
I move that we are in substantial compliance with notification for this item.
Second.
So you shortcut it. You want to read, you want the whole thing here?
No.
No?
They know what it is.
That's
But I mean, you
Or
want,
do you want me to read it?
no, you don't have to read it, but
Yeah.
you want this whole thing included.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
And we have a second. Do we have a discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay. I don't know. Okay, let's go ahead and have staff presentation.
thank you. This is a rezone request along with the CUP. When it was made, it was still physically in the county. Technically, it is today as well. About 3 days later, an application was submitted for consent annexation. That is scheduled to go to the governing body of the city of Wichita to approve that annexation on the 21st, which is before the rezoning application would even get to the governing body. So by the time we get to that point, this is going to be inside the city of Wichita. Everything we've done has been from the perspective of standards as if this is in the city of Wichita. So, property is located on the south side of 13th Street between Webb and Greenwich. Its west property line is on the half mile line. The property to the west is the quarter section that I think everybody knows is part of the recreation facilities, part of Raytheon for years, and it is now owned by the Murphy Company. It's still, and that as well as most of Raytheon is zoned industrial. The bulk of the property on the north side of 13th Street that is developed into many other, the waterfront property and some of the other stuff all the way to Greenwich. The bulk of it is zoned light industrial as well. This property remained in the county. It was acquired from Raytheon in 1992. There is still a floating parcel here that's part of Raytheon's ownership that's immediately to the east side of the property, as well as you can see the extension of the airport runway. We get to the aerial and you can see it even better. So it is this heavily treed 20-acre tract that is what is the subject of the case today. It is, as I noted, on the south side of 13th Street. It's in the area that kind of envisions residential and employment mix consistent with our comprehensive plan, irrespective of the fact it's adjoining the runway. That's the drawing, and you've got versions of that in your packet, and shows the CUP document that envisions 3 parcels, 1, 2, and 3. This is Veranda Court that comes off of 13th Street immediately across the street from Veranda, which is to the north of 13th, and then a cul-de-sac at the end. There are also reserves on the east and west side at the south end of the turnaround area, and 2 smaller ones at the entrance off of 13th Street. This is the where I'm standing in Veranda on the north side of 13th looking south. So this is the location where the drive entrance to the facility will be. That's looking to the west along 13th Street, and you can see how development has occurred on the north side. Here we are looking back east at Veranda Court on 13th Street. I'm standing in that driveway that will become the new entry point and looking north to the existing entrance for Veranda comes off of 13th Street going north back into the developments further to that in that direction. That's same place kind of looking to the northwest to see the kind of activity that exists on the west side of Veranda open. Apparently we've got construction plan because the pipes are lying there. And then you can see some of the waterfront development on further to the west. Same thing by looking east at that location. This is the bank and other improvements that are happening along 13th Street as we move towards Greenwich. So we included in the staff report recommendations regarding modifications to the general development guidelines. One of the questions that subsequently came up from commission members was a request to say, okay, we have the list of that says GC except the following, but what does that leave? So I've created and handed out to you a copy of the list of uses permitted in the zoning regulations. The yellow highlight shows the GC zoning. I've run a red line through those activities that are by the CUP excluded from being allowed. I attempted to take a yellow or pink highlighter and highlight the things that were left. Didn't copy real well. If you get further back, you're going to see a couple, 3 items that are scratched through with a blue line. And those are simply things that by the language in the CUP, it says that uses that would require a conditional use are also prohibited. So I tried to cross those out as well. So long story short, at the end, we are recommending the approval of the rezoning in the CUP with amended language outlined for development requirements. Within that, we address also the fact this property is within Zone A of the airport hazard zoning map for Wichita and Sedgwick County, particularly as it applies around the Raytheon Airport. Per that code, it puts height restrictions in Zone A at a maximum of 25 feet. There is a mechanism in that separate code, which is in Chapter 28 of the City Code, not in the Unified Zoning Code directly, that can allow modifications of height. There's a procedure to follow. It requires, at the time of building permit, documentation of certification from FAA that you're still okay with respect to any restrictions around the airport. There are slope cones around the airport that are also come into play. So what we put in the language was a restriction notation about the by right height with nothing else is 25 feet. If you wish to go further above that, up to 70 feet, there's a process that has to be followed per the airport hazard process for a waiver of those standards. And we've acknowledged that in the CUP. The intent is to make that clear. I think the agent has some minor tweaking they want to do with respect to how that's shown on the document. But the intent is there to say, we're okay, 25 by right, 70 feet maximum if you go through the waiver process outlined in the city code without having to come back and do anything to the CUP. And I think he's got a couple of other minor issues he wants to address, but the intent here is to give you a written document that says, okay, we're taking out these, but here's what's left, so that if any questions are regarding, well, what will be allowed by right, you've got that list in front of you. So be happy to answer any questions if I can.
Any questions for David? Seeing none, the agent or applicant, please.
Good afternoon, Brian Lindeback, 411 North Webb Road, MKEC Engineering, on behalf of the owners and applicant. We've got a little presentation. I've got kind of the front of the presentation. I've got, the applicant is Layham Development. We've got our subdivision cases, of course, that you previously approved here, as well as our zone change in our CUP. We advertise this as Myers Commercial. We've now changed the name to match the name of the street to Veranda. Staff expressed no issue with that, so make that announcement here. This is a preliminary plat that you guys previously approved. I'll skip through the plat unless there's some questions that refer back to that. This is the existing zoning map. I know we had a map up that kind of represented this earlier, but I think it's good to take a broader look at, what's happened in this area, this corridor. 13th Street has an industrial zoning classification. So everything here that you see in the kind of grayish blue is limited industrial. And then the green here is general office. The purple-ish magenta color is general commercial, which is what we're requesting. So you can see there's some general commercial already in the area. There's a lot of red on this map, which is limited commercial. And so I think there's good precedent for the commercial zoning application that we're asking for. And one thing to make note is there's the Layham Development has been actively developing this corridor for some 20 years, and they've want to see this property developed in a manner that is protective of their investments out there already. And of course, they do a wonderful job in their development process. I think everybody's familiar with Bradley Fair over here, and many other projects they've worked on are just really good projects here in our community. So I bring this up just to kind of show the character of the neighborhood. And then one thing to note is that limited industrial has far fewer restrictions on the property than what we are requesting here. Our CUP brings a lot of these general commercial uses and softens them to be a much more conducive to the neighborhood. So there's the existing zoning patterns. If anybody has any questions on that, I can come back to that. This is just a slide. This is a 2015 aerial. There's been a lot of development activity in this area. As you well know, waterfront is pretty much fully developed. Bradley Fair, fully developed. 21st and Greenwich intersection, nearly fully developed. This 13th and Greenwich, again, Layham Development Project, nearly fully developed. And so we're sitting kind of in the middle of some of this action, and we see that this is a good property to continue the development trend in this popular area. One thing that's good about that is most of the infrastructure is in place for that development to occur. This is our CUP. There's a couple. I just have 4 minor revisions that I've discussed with staff, and I'd like to ask the Planning Commission here today to grant these handful of little revisions to the CUP. One, just the context and the way the CUP is presented in the staff report. We think it would be more conducive for people that are not familiar with the CUP to show this 25-foot range with the double asterisk. We're not saying anything different. It's just the semantics of we want to show this range, because if the person just pulled this up first time, they would just see 25 foot and maybe not read the rest of the document. this hopefully prompts them to read the rest of the document and see, okay, what conditions allow me to go up to that 70-foot. So I think that's just a prudent thing that would be beneficial to the property and hopefully staff to answer any questions later on down the road. The next one is provision 8. It references the setbacks. This general commercial zoning allows for a 25-foot setback along the street frontage. The CUP guidelines stipulate that you need to be at 35 foot. When we submitted our application, we asked for 25 foot. I think that 25 foot is a reasonable request, and I think that given the shape of these properties, it may be better that we have the buildings maybe a little bit closer to the road right away. This RCB Bank across the street has a reduced setback, and as does this property across the street. So there's already some precedent there. So the next item is 13D. Presently, the staff report calls out that it can only be in these two reserves, these two triangles. We just ask that it be allowed across the frontage. Allow electronic message signs to be across the frontage. So not a big change, just a minor thing that we think would be best for the management of the project long term. And then lastly, somewhat minor change, the CUP, that staff comments came back that the frontage, that the buildings can only have building signage on one side of the building, whereas we would prefer to have, especially in these top two parcels, building frontage on both facades. So let's say if you had a building sitting here, and I can show you an example here. Let's say you had a building here. Orient yourself. This is the cul-de-sac. Building here, they may want to have building signage at the rear of the property and building signage at the front of the property. And this also illustrates, the 25-foot setback and how we would be beneficial in doing so. This is just a concept. This is a market-based company that sells property, based on the market demand. So while these pictures are very helpful and visualizing what could be, it's really going to boil down to what the market wants. So that's why I didn't present you a whole bunch of different concepts of what we're thinking. But so those four provisions are what I'd really like to hear a yes vote or a consent to approve that. And then, of course, we have FAA guidelines. We're very familiar with achieving the FAA approvals. We've done it numerous times on this nearby property. We've already looked into what could be achievable, and I'll kind of zoom in here. This is the runway over here, and some of the safety patterns that are required as part of the plan that they have with the FAA. But some of these numbers here just help you see that the surface of the ground to this imaginary plane, there's a 7-to-1 ratio off the end of the runway. These numbers represent that distance from the ground up to that plane. So in the middle of the project here, we're sitting here, middle of the project, 146 feet would be potentially admissible with or approvable with the FAA. We're of course not coming anywhere near that with 70 feet, but I just thought I'd show you this, that we've already done some due diligence there, and we've worked with the FAA in the past, and we actually worked with Beechcraft, MKEC did, to do the same sort of study for the Costco that's over there. So that is my presentation. I think maybe some questions. Be looking for any questions.
Any questions for the applicant? Yes, Mr. Dewell.
So when you refer to the applicant wanting the flexibility of the market to develop this property, does that indicate that the applicant doesn't have any immediate specific development plans?
There are plans to develop the property, but at this point, we don't have immediate uses to, we're gonna prepare this property for development, and that's the point of being here. Is getting our plat approved, getting our zoning in place. If we have a buyer for it later on, we don't have one just now. So.
Yes, Mr. Daly.
What is the zoning right now?
Okay, I think that was a little bit, I think Dave kind of mentioned this. This is a SF20, but we've filed for annexation. So the annexation before this case is actually approved, annexation will be approved, and so it'll functionally become SF5. So in our application, we just call it out as SF5 to GC with a CUP overlay.
I heard light industrial in here intermingled, and I was wondering if that's what this was or whether it was 20.
No, we consider limited industrial as an option just because it would match in very nicely with all the other property surrounding us. But there's some limitations, particularly residential, that you just can't you can't do in limited industrial. So that's why we've gone for the general commercial.
Any other questions? Mr. Foster?
Brian, I don't know if you've seen this handout we received. Brian, I don't know if you've received this handout that we received. It's got a title up here, Myers Commercial CUP.
Yeah, I just received that. Dale handed that to me.
There are 41 uses struck through on that. And then it looks like the ones in purple are permitted, and then the others, I don't know that they would be not allowed. It doesn't, you can't tell if it's a conditional use, but are you comfortable with all of those uses in this document?
Yeah, absolutely. We presented some of those uses, and I think there were some additional uses that were discussed after application, and so we've modified slightly some of those uses. But yes, we are consenting to the list that's presented here. I haven't actually reviewed it, but I'm sure I would trust staff has already reviewed it properly.
Any other questions?
Just one other thing then, Ryan, if you'll look at guideline 13, double check the lettering there. It differs between the document and what's on the plan itself.
Okay.
And the correction there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. Dewey?
Question for staff. Since this was handed out, should this be considered a part of the CUPs? Or is
Not our
it
intent to
adequately
attach
described?
that. It's part of the record, but not what's going to go forward on the CUP per se. This was more informational for the benefit of you guys, and it'll be part of the packet that goes to the governing body, but to codify it in the CUP, that's not our intent, no.
Any other questions? Seeing none, anybody from the audience like to speak on this? I believe you have 3 minutes, is that correct?
Kim Edgington, 2532 North Cardinal Drive, Wichita, Kansas. I am representing the neighboring property owner to the west, 13th and Webb LLC. Generally, we would just like to be on record to state that we want to make sure that the way this property develops is substantially beneficial to all of the neighboring property owners that have a very significant investment in their properties. We are in no way opposed to this kind of zone change, as it is an appropriate land use given the surrounding properties. We had hoped to have a little more time potentially to meet with this developer, just to kind of flesh out some of the specifics of how the property would develop, how that would affect my client, and how that would affect potentially other neighboring property owners and their investments in the area. This was just a little bit of an unusual circumstance with the annexation request coming following the zone change request where the DAB was not scheduled, and the DAB meeting is now following the MAPC, so you don't have the benefit of having those comments for your meeting. So just generally, we just wanted to go on record to give our hopes that we can work with this property owner to the benefit of all of the development in this area. I would be glad to stand for any questions that you might have.
Have you reviewed the list that staff handed out there? And is there
We did
some-
not receive that list. And that is one thing that we do have concerns over, just what are some of the allowed uses, some of the prohibited uses, as far as residential may be concerned, what is the density that may be proposed, the building heights. Again, that's one thing we had hoped that we could have been worked out before this
I guess
meeting, so.
I'm confused about when you knew that this was going to happen, because we've already had an objection to the notice.
Right, we did not receive a notice, but we have gotten information from staff. They did provide us with all of the staff reports and the notice. This particular list, I think, is just basically itemizing those things that were in the CUP already.
As my understanding, that list simply reflects what's on the CUP, I'm sorry, and makes it a little easier to sort of
Correct.
have them
That's my
all
understanding,
together.
too.
So I guess my question would be, if you've had a chance to review these, is there something specifically that you're objecting to? in
I don't,
one of these
no, I
uses?
will not say there's anything specific. It's more a matter of being good neighbors and working with the adjacent property owners. There will likely be issues in the future that we'll need to work with as adjoining properties, whether those be utilities, easements, things in the future. We just hope that we can continue to work through those things to both parties' benefit.
Questions? Mr. Dewey.
Since the name of the developer wasn't disclosed until today, would you feel comfortable, or if this item were deferred until you had a chance for the DAB to meet with the developer?
Absolutely. We would be glad to. I think my client has even reached out to the developer to let them know that they are happy to meet, to go over some of the issues. That would we would certainly be amenable to that.
My advice would be that if you think there is information missing that you need in order to make a decision about the case, then certainly you could defer to ask for that information. But I think it would be very difficult to defer just based on who the applicant is or isn't, because they filed the application, there's an applicant listed on the application file, and I think that'd be pretty shaky ground to do a deferral based on a single entity.
Because we don't have David, but. Johnson.
Mr. Miller, if we could request from the applicant if they would be opposed to a deferral, that would be okay. Okay.
Say again?
We could ask the applicant if he would be in favor of deferring this for 2 weeks or whatever. If that's okay to ask him, then I think it's all legally done, right?
Do that during the rebuttal?
No, I'm just asking legal's opinion.
And yeah, I think you could ask that question. I think if the applicant doesn't want to do it, then I'd concur with Dale's comments.
Any other questions? Seeing none, anyone else from the audience like to speak on this
Thank
item?
you.
State your name and address.
Chad Eck, 1 Cessna Boulevard, on behalf of Textron Aviation. So I think we just wanted to go on record as well, just to make sure the commission was understood our concerns just in terms of height restrictions. Maybe some of that's addressed in terms of what Brian shared in terms of the approval process that has to go forward. I think we're about 650 feet from the southeast corner of the property to our runway. I know we have to maintain a 400 feet obstruction-free zone, so we're pretty close in terms of that. And so, number one, just for overall safety, being in somewhat of a hazard area. I think the other thing we want to make sure everybody's aware of is just our concern in terms of increased drainage or retainage pond type area. I think I saw in the proposed, and I know it's not necessarily a final draft or exactly what you're going to go do, but we definitely saw increased levels of water there perhaps. And so anytime we have that, towards the end of our runway, that brings the potential for increased waterfowl in the area, which is always a concern of ours. And so we as well, unfortunately, have not had a ton of time to review this. I think I'm a part of our facilities engineering team. We got into this yesterday. Not to say that notice didn't go out as appropriate, just with the combination of the Textron Aviation, the Cessna, and the Beechcraft properties. Where it went internally from a mail in terms of a large corporation, it was difficult that we didn't actually receive notice. So anyway, we haven't had a lot of time to review that in terms of how it would potentially impact the end of our runway. So we just wanted to go on record and say that. I don't know that we have any necessarily objections to the usage, very similar to what the other teams shared. But.
Any questions for the speaker? Okay, thank you. Anyone else from the audience like to speak? And we'll have rebuttal.
Hi, my name is Amy Lebo. I'm Chief Corporate Counsel and Chief Operating Officer for Layham Development, 150 North Market. Just to respond to a couple of the things that have been stated, while you all may have learned today that we were the developer, the Murphy Group has known before today that we were the developer, and we've had a couple of conversations with them about it. As far as a deferral, we would not be in favor of a deferral. And don't feel that it's warranted in this instance. So I think those were the only issues that were brought up. If there are others that I need to respond to, I'm happy to do so.
Sir Warren.
Amy, just this list right here.
Yes.
I'm a little bit confused. Is this list basically, if it's not a part of the CUP, what good is it?
It is a part of the CUP in that the CUP says general commercial zoning except these things, and the except are the things that have been crossed through.
You're good with the lines that have been crossed?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the speaker? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
I have a question for staff. So if we approve this today, we're approving it as if it's in the county.
Pardon me, I didn't hear the question, I'm sorry.
If we approve this today, we're approving it as if it's in the county, which it is.
We're acting on it as presented. It is presently physically within the county, but it's still subject to the same provisions of GC and the CUP. Before it gets to final action by a governing body, it will be annexed into the city and will go exclusively to the Wichita City Council.
Okay, I mean, and the council takes our hearing as
Yes.
word, but we're really not hearing it for the city today. Does that make a difference?
I think the best way to describe it is this hearing is the planning commission hearing, and because this planning commission is the planning commission for both the city council of Wichita and also the board of county commissioners, it could serve in either function. The way the zoning code's worded is the ultimate approving authority is from the governing body. And so the governing body's worded to where, depending on where the property is, it may be the city council or the board of county commissioners, and if the annexation is effective before it gets to the governing body, the city council would be the governing body.
Dale, let me understand. I know that our hearing is the last public hearing for the city, but does the county not offer public hearing in addition to this? And is that an issue?
This is the only public hearing. When the county commission hears cases, that's a public opportunity for people to speak, but is technically not the public hearing.
A staff question.
Daily.
Are you comfortable with the modifications that the applicant had
Yes.
up there on the screen?
We talked about those before the hearing, and for the most part, what they're asking for is tweaking the language for further clarification. There's the only real adjustment different is the setback question, and that's a decision before this commission. If you move forward with a recommendation to accept their changes, then it would be reflecting the language they're proposing. Otherwise, it would go forward with the 35-foot setback issue.
Buster.
Dave, is the GC 25-foot normally, or is it 35-foot?
It's the CUP that imposes the 35-foot setback. GC is 20 or 25-foot normally, but
Actually, the original application would have allowed a 20-foot setback along 13th and a 0-foot setback on veranda.
Any other questions for anybody? Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the commission.
I move we accept with the changes that the applicant had asked for.
Second. A motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. Opposed?
No.
It's 10-1.
10-1. 10-1.
10-1, yeah.
Motion passes 10-1. Okay, next item would be anything else that may come up. Seeing none, we're adjourned.